It is 5 p.m. We can go ahead and get started, and as folks trickle in, we can just go from there. But good evening, all. I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight to the first ever panel discussion hosted by the Secretary of State Ambassadors from Student Leadership Johns Creek about the impacts on education that virtual and remote learning has had. Hi, my name is Mehar Namani. I'm a junior at Centennial High School. And I am part of the Secretary Ambassador team. Our Secretary of State team consisted of 9 high schoolers, including Aditi Mohan, Akila Yelapragada, Ashu Chakragiri, Charlotte Lichtenfeld, Elizabeth Douglas, Omer Mujawar, and Ty Devilbukta. We will be the ones that are moderating and running the event tonight. So we have with us today a myriad of students, parents, and teachers ready to discuss with us and our team the extent to which remote learning has impacted our education. So growing up, I was always told the importance of education. As I began to look around me, I saw a plethora of role models speaking about education, starting with Malala, the girl who was shot by the Taliban while fighting for her education and for the education of her community. She says, "One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world." I take these powerful words and I try to imply them into my everyday life. Another one of my personal favorites was none other than our previous president, Barack Obama, who gave a speech on education about how the stuff we're learning in school, whether it be algebra, and many of us students are constantly like, when will we ever use this in our day-to-day life? And to that, he responded that we might not have to physically solve for X, but those practices that we were doing were equipping us and preparing us to think critically about our day-to-day problems and face the challenges that we are encountering today. Finally, as someone interested in linguistics and learning Sanskrit, I have learned this common Sanskrit excerpt about the importance of education, which goes like this: Vidya dhanam sarvadhana pradhanam, meaning that the wealth of education is the only wealth that will never perish away. The more you put into it, the more you get out of it, and it'll stay alongside you until your last breath. The pandemic as a whole has transformed our society, changing industries and systems forever. And one that has been impacted and changed significantly has been our own educational system. As for the majority of last semester, many of us were full-time remote students and learners to maintain the safety of our schools and community. Thus, we thought it'd be interesting to hold a panel that compares the impacts of remote learning from different perspectives, including students, teachers, and parents, which is why we have all gathered here today. We will be having 3 mini panels overall, one with teachers, one with students, and one with parents. Please make sure to keep your mic muted and video off at all time when our panel is in session, as well as, but feel free to post any questions that you might have for our panelists in the chat, as we will have a Q&A-ish session at the end. So with that, I would like to kick it over to Janice and Omer, who will be starting to moderate our first session, which will be with teachers. So thank you all for joining us.
All right, thank you so much, Mahar. Again, like Mahar just said, I'm going to be introducing the parents, and we're going to be talking about some of the experiences that parents have had. And specifically, I'm very grateful, and I want to thank all of the parents who've come tonight to participate. Mrs. Ganesh from Northview, Miss Whitlock from Chattahoochee, Miss Gottschalk from Johns Creek High School, Miss Owen from Centennial, and Mr. Kallur from Autry Mill Middle School. Again, I want to thank you all for coming tonight, spending your evening here, and being able to give us a little bit about your experience in remote learning in the virtual environment. So again, thank you so much. And I'll be heading over, giving it to Janice Nam, who's going to be speaking with the first question.
Hi, so I'm Janice, like Omer said, and I will be asking the first question. Before I do that, I'd like to again thank everyone for joining today, especially the parents who have taken their time to speak today. So on a positive note, the first question is, what lessons have you learned from remote learning that you will retain later on when your child or your children return to face-to-face instruction? And you guys can take a moment to think about your answer. Yeah.
Is this addressed to a particular person or?
So this is addressed to all of the parents in general. Yeah.
Okay.
Happy to do so. This is Karen Gottschalk. I am a parent to a 7th grader at Autry Mill Middle School and a 10th grader at Johns Creek High School. On your question in terms of lessons learned, I think that from my perspective, the generation that you are all in will probably be the most resilient generation that there is. Because if you think about this, is such a pandemic situation that affected all of us. Across many generations. You have grandparents, you have parents, you have your siblings being impacted by this from a very global impact to a very minute impact, which is your day-to-day learning. So although this is a very unfortunate event for each and every one of us at all levels, across all countries, all continents, I really think that the most powerful impact that will come out of this is that you are all going to be very resilient, and probably the most resilient that we will ever be. So having said that, I think that you guys will be who we will look to see, how do we overcome issues, because I'm thinking that as we become more globalized, this is kind of like the beginning of what we can begin to see as we become more and more globalized.
Thank you for your response, Ms. Gottschalk.
And let me add that, sorry, before I was on mute, apologize for that. So that's a very good point. Apart from what I consider based, my actually son is in senior Northview High School, and one of the things that I am fortunate about is it was from a Northview perspective, we had our own teachers tutoring these kids over for our remote learning. So that really helped us, right? Initially, it used to be using gaps with teachers that they were not familiar with. In this case, it was his own teachers that taught him on the face-to-face, and it was really helpful. But from a lessons learned perspective, I think this taught them to be more responsible, be able to learn how to handle the situation and be able to meet the expectations of the parents, teachers, as well as the academics, and be able to shine through all that. So this growth that they have gained, not just my son, anyone who's experienced this, I think they will take over into their next step in their life, and that would really help in their face-to-face too. Although they would love to go and face their teachers and friends, but then this responsibility will carry over. And I definitely see a change in the students' attitude when they go to face-to-face. There will be more maturity, I feel.
I'll kind of jump in on that. I'm Pam Whitlow, a son that's a senior at Chattahoochee. So from a parent's perspective, I agree with what the previous parents have said. I think that I was surprised at the resiliency and how quickly my son adapted to the situation. I think it's kind of a testament to that generation of already being competent with computers and having some experience with that, since he's an older student. And I think it's really pushed him to be more self-directed and more responsible, which is those are skills that we always worry about when our kids go off to college. I've got older kids of my own, and so we always wondered, would they make that transition to being responsible for their own grades and stuff. And so I think this was kind of a, jump into the senior year instead of, delaying it by another year. On the flip side of that, I can also remember what it was like when my kids were younger. And I think this would have been an incredible challenge with younger children, just the intensity that that is put on the parents, the responsibility of making sure those middle schoolers and those elementary schoolers are keeping up with that. Just from a maturity standpoint, they're not quite there like you would see your high schoolers. So I think that the success of what has happened is in large part due to the age of the students and the ability of the parents to kind of facilitate and be that support system when they've needed it. But I've seen really good results with my son, and I've seen really good results with many of my students that I teach. So again, I think those are lifelong skills. You know, this day and age, we're always going to have to, or we should be wanting to learn constantly, regardless of our age. So being able to realize I need to learn how to do something, and how do I go do that independently with some support from, you know, the infrastructure, has been a really good reminder to me that this happens at all ages, not just our students.
Hi, this is Shivakulur. I would like to point out, I'm a parent of a middle schooler and an elementary schooler. So, and with two parents that are working, you know, with middle schooler, you know, it's fine. You know, she's been able to manage the school work. One thing I think they will probably take out of this is, you know, when they go to the real world, when they're collaborating on a project or something where they're, you know, working with teams across the world, I think, you know, digital transformation is definitely something that has happened, and I think this definitely will help them in their careers in the future, how to collaborate online, digitally, on working on a project. The remote working definitely has helped. I think, you know, building up their skill level. I think it's a positive. But dealing with a elementary school child, trying to go through different classes, and then, you know, switching on to different teachers, that's been very challenging. So that's a downside. But I think for middle schoolers and high schoolers, I think definitely they have adapted to this scenario easily, better than other kids of younger age.
Okay, thank you everyone for giving a response to that question. I want to follow up with another question that's, and I know Mr. Kalur was talking about like some of the benefits and some of the advantages that, and the resilience, I guess is a good word, that your children are learning in this environment. But do you think that a remote learning environment that we're in right now is a worse quality situation than in-person education? And specifically, if you could elaborate, what do you think is missing, and what do you think your role, maybe the role of teachers and schools are to help maybe address that issue?
Oh, definitely. I think, you know, in-person learning definitely is better, I would say. I mean, you know, we are thrust into this situation, and, you know, we have no choice. I think the face-to-face interaction with the teachers and coming up with ideas, and then, you know, learning things, you know, the teacher, when they're looking at a student, looking at the expressions, or, you know, on the face of a student, whether that person is actually understanding something the teacher is trying to say or not, cannot be communicated, you know, online. Even though you see the person on the computer, I think face-to-face definitely is definitely a plus. And the social interaction in the classroom with the teacher, with the other students, collaboration, I don't think you can beat that. But I think that's definitely a disadvantage of you know, this type of system. But I guess, you know, we don't have a choice at this stage. I guess the students are trying to get the best out of what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. May I comment?
Yeah, for sure. We'd love to hear everybody's opinion.
I do agree with Mr. Kalur that, of course, anyone would, especially as a parent, would love to be able to have what we had before. Who would have thought that, you know, just getting things back to normal would be such a blessing, right? But in regards to adding to what he just mentioned, I think that it would also be helpful as a parent if you as a student, if you guys would, you know, come to us as your parent and say, look, I have more stress than normal. I know that, you know, we're probably not the first person you like to talk to, and I get that, I'm okay with that. But if you're more comfortable to talking to another adult, a family friend, you know, your friend's parents more than your own parents, you should think that as another avenue, right? Or if one of your friends want to come and talk to me, I would more than be happy to listen to them and see, you know, and it's not really to solve any problems, but just to get what's bothering you off of your mind, and to let you feel that you're not alone in this. And I think that with, you know, where you guys are at this stage in your life, you think you could probably conquer and do everything, which I'm sure you all can because of where you are at. However, don't be afraid to open up and to ask for help and to talk to others, even if it's not your parent.
Thank you for your response. So before we end this segment, could I ask Mrs. Owen to give her input on this too? I think you're muted. I'm sorry. Yeah.
There. I'm going to agree along the same lines. The difficulties, I think one of the biggest difficulties is, and it's not a particular school, but just the communication that has come down from Fulton County. And I have a middle school and a high schooler, and it's easier for me to manage, and I'm home with them, so it's easier to manage. I could not imagine going through this with a child in elementary school, and I guess a lack of planning or time we get to plan for the next week, and the social interaction as well. I think kids need that piece, and like my older child with some of the AP classes, I feel like you see the teacher on a Zoom call or Teams or however, but it's something different when you're sitting in classroom and you can raise your hand and everybody bounces ideas off of each other. And I feel like some children are hesitant to speak up online. But
And
I
one
put
other
it
thing,
on the same line, said our kids are resilient.
yeah, one other thing I've noticed is not every student is turning on their cameras. I go and see some of my daughter's classroom. A lot of them are blank screens with just initials on it. So I think, you know, definitely that that interaction is not there.
And I would hate to be that teacher to see nothing but blank screens. I mean, that would be so hard for me to interact with a blank screen. So I don't know how I don't know how the parent or the teachers are doing it. Kudos to the teachers.
Yeah.
Can y'all hear me this time?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'll kind of jump on this since I've kind of got both perspectives. It is really challenging to talk to a computer when you know, it's much nicer when I can see people. At the same time, you know, we started this year in remote with new classes of students that we didn't necessarily know. You know, last year when we went to remote in March, we already had that relationship built with the students. So we kind of knew who might need a little more support, who you could push a little further, who you needed to kind of back off of in that whole magic of the classroom. Starting in August with new students, we didn't have that. So building that relationship with those 33 students in every class period was really, really challenging. And part of that, and this is different from teacher to teacher, I don't make my students turn the cameras on because I don't want to put them in an uncomfortable place. So I leave it optional, and I'll have about half the students turn them on occasionally. And it's just one of those, there's not a great answer to that. But the lack of face-to-face is a challenge with remote learning. From a teacher standpoint, a parent standpoint, student standpoint, it's just different. And you know, I wish there was a right answer, a magic solution, and then, you know, we'd all just be all happy, but it's hard. It's real hard.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Whitlock, and to all the other parents for speaking about this. And I think that you provided a great transition to our next segment, which is going to be about the teachers and their perspectives. And so I want to thank again all the parents for coming here and for spending a couple minutes to talk about your experiences. And I think we'll be heading off to discuss with the teachers. So all the parents, you can stay on, you can keep your cameras on, or you cannot, you don't have to, I guess similar to what the students are choosing. It's really up to your choice. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. So Meher and I will be moderating this segment, and we'll be asking you questions. We'd love to have a great debate and discussion like last time. And for our next segment, it'll be for your teachers and principals of schools in our area. And I'd like to say that we are all so thankful for everything you do, and we're really lucky to have you. A quote I'm really fond of says that a teacher affects eternity, and he can never tell where his influence stops. And skills like math and science are being taught to us in schools, but even in remote learning, we're still learning about resilience and integrity, and those are skills which will stay with us throughout our whole lives. So without further ado, I'd like to present our teachers, Ms. Bartley and Mr. Kirby from River Trail Middle School, Mr. Lemerand, who's a principal for Shakrag Elementary School, Ms. Whitlock, who's from Hooch. She also joined us as a parent, Mr. Schultz and Dr. Wynn from Johns Creek, and Mr. Hennessy from Centennial High School. We're so glad to have you all here today, and I'll be turning it over to Meher, who will be telling us our first question.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Ms. Whitlock gave us an excellent transition into our teacher segment. Could not have done it better ourselves. But going into that, our first question for our panelists on the teacher side of things is, how have you had to adapt your teaching for remote learning? Do you see yourself applying these new methods in the future? I'd like to start it off with Christine Lemerand.
Yeah, perfect. Hi, I am the principal at Shakrag Elementary, and we've had many different decisions that we have had to make throughout this journey as the educators on this side. But listening to the feedback from the parents, a lot of what they're sharing are some of the same struggles that we're having as well. From the education side, we can't. Nothing, in my opinion, can replace that face-to-face learning, that face-to-face collaboration and instruction. I know in the Johns Creek community, we have been extremely fortunate, supportive community, technology, capabilities and whatnot. And so we have been able to manage and make it work pretty well. But nothing can replace that face-to-face piece. And so as far as us having to adapt and change our teaching styles, we definitely have had to do that. And I think the teachers have learned just as much as the students within this past year. Some have been pretty tech savvy, others were afraid of technology. And so they have learned so much just like the kids have. And a lot of what we have learned has not only changed education in general, but moving forward, there are some good things that we will keep and we will be able to use in the future. And then there's a lot of it that even though it's good practices and it's been working well, we still, again, want that face-to-face interaction.
No, absolutely. Mr. Schultz, would you like to add something to that?
Sure. You know, I think I'd like to echo the comments for sure. I think everybody probably, or 90% of people probably have learned a lot in terms of, especially in terms of technology and technology use in the classroom. For me specifically, I'm trying to, I've kind of been thinking since yesterday about the idea of kind of what I'll use going forward from this year, because I'm not the biggest technology person. And I know some people are really good at using technology and that's really a part of their practice. And it's never been for me. So it has been nice to learn and kind of go into the technology piece and kind of see what I'm missing. But quite frankly, nothing strikes me as something that I'll definitely for sure be using in the future. Like I say, I guess I would say, you know, just, you know, being in adverse circumstances and being able to expand your toolkit, you know, does bring with it its own rewards. And so, you know, even if, you know, nothing strikes me right now as something I will for sure use in the future, I think, you know, both for the teachers and for the students, there will definitely be at the very least kind of basic skills we use going forward. And probably, and like I say, there's more sort of stuff in my toolkit to say, oh, this student isn't responding in the way the majority of students in the past have responded. There are now new kind of, I guess, techniques or strategies I can use based around the technology that I've kind of come up with, I guess I would say.
Sorry, I was having some mic issues. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
I think one thing that a lot of teachers will take away from this is just kind of adding to our, I guess, kind of stockpile of resources. I know thinking like instructional strategies, you know, maybe in the future, there's going to be a push to allow some students to be more virtual because for some students it's better. I think, you know, at least for me teaching, I do miss having that face-to-face across the board. But after this year, I'm just going to have a lot more resources available that will be accessible from home. So a lot of things that students didn't have access to, that only had access to at school, I can now provide to students at home. And so that will be helpful when, you know, if I need to provide some additional assignments to help make some content clear, or if I want to give a homework, but I don't want to like drown them in reading, I've got more videos and things of that nature I can push out instead. So that will definitely be a big plus from this year.
Absolutely. For our next question, it's kind of a follow-up from the last one. It's how has your students' performance been affected by remote learning? Ms. Bartley, would you like to put your thoughts in?
Sure. I would say it just kind of depends on the student. As Mr. Hennessy said, some students are doing wonderful in the virtual learning format, but some students are struggling. I'll be honest with that. I will say a lot of my time is spent on kind of following up on students about checking into class, getting signed into class on time, and all that kind of stuff like that. So that's where I spend a good amount of time. But for the students that are flourishing in this program, really have been doing great. I haven't noticed like a big grade progression drop or anything like that. You know, teachers have been a lot more flexible in this program too. So I would say, you know, it's given students the ability to go back and rework things and all that kind of stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I think that in a way I kind of worry about the students. I teach 8th grade social studies, and I kind of worry about them because I feel like for some kids, and I teach tag, so for most of the tag kids, you know, this is perfect for them, staying at home and all that. But for the ones that aren't really, there's some that are struggling a lot. I worry about the fact that they're not meeting deadlines like they should. They're not, a lot of them, I know for a fact, are not even getting out of bed. They stay in bed all day long. They tell me they do, so I know they do. They don't even get dressed, you know. And so I just kind of, I have a concern. I was talking to a kid that goes to Northview yesterday. Actually, I ran into them, and he's a junior, and he's scared to death because he's always been an A student, but evidently he took the SAT recently or something, and he did really bad on it. And he thinks it's because he's been virtual for the last, you know, almost a year now being virtual. With 8th grade students, at first, when the students were allowed to just keep retaking a test until they get the grade they want, I noticed that tests they weren't doing as well to begin with. Now that they don't have that option, they're doing well to begin from the start. So again, it was just like, we're not going to study. Why study when we can take the test and then be able to take it again or again and again? So as a group with our social studies teachers, we decided a while back we were not going to allow that, even though we were supposed to. But that's when we saw the grades come up, because the kids, you know, realized they had one makeup at that point, and so their grades came up. A lot of the kids that I talk to are not happy staying at home. Some of them are, the more introverted ones are, but there's a lot of extroverted kids who are having to stay at home because their parents won't let them come to school, and they're miserable and they're very unhappy. And so that kind of shows in their interaction. I have kids who I literally, if they were to walk in my door right now, I wouldn't know who they were because I've never seen their face because they've never turned on their computer. So I have no clue what they look like. And I'm like, I'm going to see these kids out on the street one day and they're going to go, "Hey, Mr. Kirby." And I'm going to be like, "Okay, who are you?" Because I have no idea. I don't know what they look like. So I have a lot of concerns with that kind of stuff. You know, I'm a people person. I don't like doing this remote stuff. My largest class has 7 kids in it. face-to-face when we're face-to-face, has 7 kids in it. The rest of them are at home. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents on that.
No, absolutely. That's all. I definitely agree. As a student perspective, a lot of times, one time I talked to my teacher in person and they were like, "Oh, it's so nice to see you," like, because we've never actually met. But yeah, so moving into the next question, which will kind of be your final question here, would be what specifically could be changed to improve your teaching experience and your students' performance for remote learning? I'd like to start us by asking off Dr. Wine to add to us.
If you don't mind, I may speak a little bit to some of the other questions, or one of the other questions. I think it was about, you know, just the teaching in general. So I teach math at Johns Creek High School, and obviously STEM and humanities are very different beasts. And, you know, I would actually go, when I start thinking about teaching strategies, I would probably say right now in remote learning, as much as I would want to use a plethora of teaching strategies, I find that I'm using really no teaching strategies other than almost direct instruction, which is not necessarily terribly compelling. But in the environment where we are, it seems like it's the most efficient thing to do. It's getting the information out, but it would not necessarily be my, you know, all those research-based strategies that anybody who teaches any subject matter would want to utilize and in normal times would utilize. It almost feels like you're restricted where you can't, it's like you're bound and you can't go outside those bounds, if that makes sense. So in terms of what I would want to take away also from this school year is that going forward, I'll just be thankful it's not this school year, actually. I think sometimes you have to have, you know, a situation that's bad to appreciate when it's good. So I think this particular school year, you know, I mean, we've made the best of the situation that we could make of it, and we definitely take feedback and we try to improve upon it. But I think that, you know, it's kind of like after you've been bound up for the winter, when the spring comes, you're like, wow, it's so nice to be outside. It's so nice that the time changes. So, you know, so all those things that you come to take for granted, you know, I hope that all of us on this panel will at least for the next few years, remember, wow, 2021 was really interesting. I need to embrace the fact that I have students sitting in front of me. And because when you think about collecting data, I'm just saying this to every teacher, that eye contact and watching facial expressions, that's a form of data collection. And to the parent who was saying, gosh, how do you live with watching just the initials on the screen? It's hard. So, you know, you're as best as you can, you're encouraging people to unmute and you're encouraging people to contribute ideas, but it's not easy.
I'll kind of jump in on this. And as far as, you know, how I've had to change my teaching, you know, what I could walk into a classroom and have ready to roll in a really good lesson in 10 or 15 minutes takes me an hour or more to prep for an online class, because the way you deliver it is different. You've got to have the communication resources set up. It's not good enough to just, you know, talk and tell the students. I've got to have the recording set up. I've got to have the PowerPoint slides to kind of make sure there's some consistency of communication from one class to the next. And I think that is actually one of the biggest learning curves for me, was getting into what is the best, most consistent way of communicating with my students. And I've kind of come up with what I think is working, and I will probably keep that going even more back face-to-face, just because it ensures that consistency. It ensures that the students know what standards we're covering, what we did on Monday. You know, if you're absent on Monday, here's where you can go and get everything you need. So that's sort of made me a better communicator. But I'll just, you know, I think every teacher up here would say that that lack of being in a room with a student, reading their body language, reading their faces, knowing when to go over and give them some help to facilitate getting them through the problem, knowing when to back off and let them deal with it, letting them talk in groups. that's all the stuff that we're missing. And that's what makes a classroom different than an online course. So I think we're all missing that, trying to replicate it as much as we can, but it's challenging. I will say the one thing I think has been most surprising is I am getting input from some students that were really hesitant to give me input. They would never unmute and talk in an online class, but if I put up a form and say, hey, give me your top 2 questions, then I'm getting some really authentic feedback because they're not hesitant to share that. So I'm learning some better communication techniques. Doesn't replace the face-to-face, but it's getting a little better. So
absolutely. And with that, thank you everyone for participating in our teacher segment. A good teacher, there's this really famous quote that says, a good teacher is like a candle, it consumes itself to light the way from others. Teachers are very important in our society. You practically build up our generation and our society and are integral to the smooth functioning of our society. And we're so grateful to have such great teachers with us today. And thank you all for sharing. And this has been really insightful. With that, I will turn it over to our next panelists, which are the students. So you can hear from them as well, which should be interesting, with Ashu and Charlotte.
All right, hi everyone. So my name is Charlotte and I'll be working with Ashu here. So I would like to start off with a quote from Albert Einstein: "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity." So I think this is, you're good? Okay. So I think this is important because really we've learned a lot from being online. It's been hard, but I think we've taken a lot of valuable lessons out of this. So Ashi, would you like to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the first question is going to be, how has remote learning impacted your academic performance and comprehension of subject matter?
Hi, I can answer your question. I'm Jennifer Mendoza, and I'm a junior from Centennial High School. And I mean, to begin with, I can say that it's been very difficult. Like, I know, like, I'm taking a lot of AP classes, and all my classes are honors, and just like AP classes, how you get the experience from in the classroom of being like timed essays and all that. You don't get that experience while in remote learning, and it's been hard because you worry about like those exams that are coming up and all that, and it's just been difficult. And then like when it comes to like taking notes and all that, like sometimes you have to go back, and like that teacher student relationship, it's been very hard to build. And I had the opportunity to go in person like for the first 2 phases, I think, and I was able to meet the teacher, so it was a little easier for me to interact with them. But it's still really hard and like to speak up and ask questions because everybody is just shy, and yeah, it's just been really hard.
Yeah, definitely, I can relate to those concerns too. Yeah, does anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to attest to that too. That's more than true, I guess. To put it simply. Yeah, it shifts a lot. Online learning shifts a lot of the burden to the student. They're responsible, for actually picking up on the material, being on top of things, and you aren't necessarily being, pushed around by the teacher as much. And so, yeah, the burden shifted upon the student. And I guess in the end, that's going to make the student more responsible over their own learning.
So on that note, are there any strategies that you guys use to cope with dealing with focusing and anything like that?
I think one thing that you could do is it's really helpful to turn your camera on because that helps you stay focused, because you know that you're in your teacher's site, and it's like, so it helps you from not getting distracted and like, I don't know, going on your phone or something, because you know that the teacher is looking at you. And yeah, basically that.
I actually remember I take Chinese, so my Chinese teacher would call random students to answer questions, and that really helped me stay on top of things and never fall behind in her class. Because I know like some classes they just choose people randomly to, and I mean they choose people to answer questions voluntarily. So I think like um, really kind of having that motivation to answer questions can also.
Okay, yeah, thank you for sharing some of the strategies. So I actually want to direct this to Samita. So could you like share if you faced any technical difficulties related to remote learning, and if they've like if you have, then have they adversely affected your comprehension of material or your grade?
Yeah, occasionally I do experience technical difficulties uh for example, this morning I was trying to say something in a class, like answer a question so I could get my participation grade. Then my mic wasn't working, and it like even though I said I was unmuted, my teacher wasn't able to hear me, and I think that kind of makes it a little bit difficult to participate in class, especially if that happens a lot, because I just if I can't ask my questions and it takes them a little bit longer to see the chat, then they might not, like my questions might not get answered at all. And so, but yeah, and then sometimes I think my computer can get really slow. My Wi-Fi stops working, and like in the middle of a test, for example, it just completely shuts down, and I have to and it takes me like 5 minutes to restart my computer, and I can't use that to answer I can't use that towards my chem test, and that kind of makes it a little bit difficult. But yeah, I would just say occasionally that happens, but overall, I would say that yeah, other than that, it's like I don't really have that many technical difficulties.
Okay, so would anybody else like to add on?
I could definitely attest to the whole your computer getting slow. I'd say that, running teams, running like 30 PDFs in the background, 30 tabs in the background definitely takes a toll on your computer. And so that at certain times can become frustrating because, trying to get started on your work, that sort of just becomes like a burden. And, you start to think to yourself, how am I going to be able to have all these things open and answer the teacher and, do my own work at the same time if my own computer can't even handle that.
So for juniors and seniors, with many colleges going test optional this year, does this increase or decrease the amount of stress on you?
I'd say well, it depends on how you interpret it, but largely I'd say it definitely increases your stress because like normally junior year is the year in which you start, bulking your application, start looking at scholarships and, doing everything you can to essentially extend or add detail to your application. And so by going online, you're sort of forced on your own end to start heavily looking for online opportunities and anything significant that can be added to your applications. And so at the end of the day, it makes the junior year experience significantly more difficult.
I can definitely add to that. Like going into senior year, you're worried about your SAT, your ACT, and like you have to start looking for those resources. Like not being able to take the PSAT and that free practice, that has definitely taken a toll. And like it's just you have to look for more opportunities outside. Like you're worried about like extracurriculars and all that, and having to reach out to like people for online opportunities, and like it's just been more difficult, and it is like a lot of stress going into senior year because we don't know if things will be the same or if we'll be back to normal by then, but we'll just have to go and see.
Okay, yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. I kind of want to transition now to kind of your extracurricular activities. So, have you had to change your extracurricular activities, if at all?
I would say I take multiple extracurricular activities, and for my dance and my singing class, I would definitely say it's been a little bit harder to do those, just because it's like hard to get corrections and everything. And like again, when the Wi-Fi doesn't work, it's really difficult. Like in my singing class, it sometimes she doesn't hear me and I have to repeat it, especially when I don't know. It's kind of embarrassing. But and then in dance, it gets hard because she just can't see me at sometimes. Um, but yeah, I think it's been a little bit difficult just switching online. I feel like I haven't been learning as much because we've been more focusing on the fact that our Wi-Fi isn't connected more than that I can't like sing this. So yeah, it's been pretty difficult like that.
Can I add to that by saying that especially in things like dance and like I do debate, it's kind of hard to get feedback from like your coach or your dance instructor, because one thing that I've been really experiencing is dance is that you have to do the mirror image of what they're doing, and I find that really hard because I like to do whatever the instructor is doing instead of doing the mirror image. So it's been kind of hard learning things and like getting material and like revising stuff, because a lot of the times you can't hear the teacher, or they're having technical difficulties, or they can't share their slides. So a lot of time is also wasted by doing different things.
Yeah, and I mean, if I could add kind of to that, I mean, I'm the moderator, but yeah, I mean, I'm involved in an internship. You know, usually it's been in-person internships, and now you have to transition to kind of virtual internships, and then it takes quite a while to get issues resolved, especially since you're communicating through email, and people don't really check their emails that often, or they just get a flood of emails, so they can't respond to any issues or questions you might have in a timely manner. Like, okay, Charlotte, do you want to go to the next question?
Sure. So what's the most outrageous thing that's happened to you this year or your classmates?
I mean, outrageous isn't kind of funny.
I'd certainly say I've heard a lot of things from people that haven't had their mics muted. I guess in terms of funniness, I mean, I've heard a student go on like a full out cussing rampage about the teacher. And so, yeah, it's definitely been the most remarkable in terms of remarkable as in like funny thing that's happened this school year.
Does anybody else want to share something?
Yeah, I think I've also experienced that. Like, I've heard so many people just like saying not so nice things about their teachers and maybe their classmates and how stressed they are. And also, I think I've heard some people, they accidentally stay unmuted, and they're like watching TikToks and everything. And those TikToks might not be so school appropriate, but I think just the fact that they're watching TikToks kind of, but yeah, so.
I think the funniest thing that may have happened to me was we were in class and someone's mom started screaming at them in the background. My teacher stopped. Everyone stopped, and the person didn't know their mic was on for like 5 minutes. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I guess that will conclude this segment. Thank you all for participating, but do stay on the call because we're going to transition to our next segment, which is basically a collective discussion between teachers, students, parents. Okay, so I'll give it over to Akila. She's going to be the moderator for that segment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Akila Yelpragada. First of all, I'd like to thank all our panelists today for joining us. As someone who also deeply values education, it was very interesting hearing the different perspectives on remote learning from our faculty members, parents, and students. Secondly, a huge thank you to our parents and faculty members for everything you have done to ensure us students receive the best learning experiences as possible, regardless of the challenges imposed on the education system this year, and your efforts are greatly appreciated. So having said, I'd like to open the floor for a discussion across our 3 groups. Just like before, I will ask some questions and everyone is welcome to answer. So if everyone could just kind of turn their cameras on, that would be great. So the first question is, how has your daily routine changed as a result of the remote learning environment?
I can attest to that. I mean, I think I mentioned that I do have a elementary school. My son is in elementary school. That's probably is the biggest challenge for me because, you know, even though I make sure that all his material is on his desk, sometimes you won't be able to find it. I may be on a call or I may be doing something as part of my job, and like he'll scream from his room that, you know, he's looking for this stuff. So I have to stop what I'm doing and then go. And this is going to be constant throughout the day. So that's been very challenging, but I guess everybody's been understanding, you know, my colleagues and, you know, and my clients whom I'm working with, they understand that, you know, everybody's going through this. And, you know, if sometimes, you know, my son runs into my room, you know, when I'm on a call on camera, and then, you know, but they understand. But definitely, a lot of my important work I sometimes do after my kids go to bed, if I have to get stuff done, important things. So definitely my day has been longer, and trying to manage these things has been stressful. But I think, you know, we're doing this for almost a year now. I think I kind of got used to it.
Right, and parent moderation during the whole remote learning thing, it's very integral, no matter how old the child is. Yeah, it's very important.
Akila, let me add to that, right? So one of the students mentioned how someone, a parent was screaming. It's actually the other way around also happens. I mean, I personally have had not that experience because my child is older, but then any of the calls that we have, you can hear the kids screaming and fighting in the background. So it's like, it's funny. I wouldn't say it's disrupted my things. What I'm trying to say is that, like, you know, it's reflecting what the previous parent mentioned, right? It is challenging from a student's perspective and also from the parent's perspective, as a few of those have mentioned in this panel, that if you have much smaller kids, being able to manage an elementary child's education and also maintaining your deadlines with what you're working, that is a kind of a balancing act that most of the parents had to go through this year, and it's very stressful and challenging too. So that's something that I feel sorry for parents with younger kids who had, or even when I say parents, even teachers, I mean, they are parents themselves. They have to manage their job as well as, you know, being able to do that. So just want to add that and give my kudos to the parents and teachers who are able to sustain this for so long.
Yeah, I definitely agree. This whole parent situation, I feel like it's a very universal experience, because I've seen it firsthand too with my younger brother and my parents managing his education. So I'd like to ask Ms. Christine Zemrin for her perspective on this.
It's very similar to what you guys are saying. And first and foremost, I mean, as an administrator at the school level, I just have to thank everybody for doing such an amazing job, because no one necessarily asked for this. And so everyone was just kind of thrown into it, and every family situation and dynamics is different. We will take our kids back face to face in the building anytime we can get them. But we also understand all of the different perspectives and needs for the families to keep their children home. With the day-to-day operations and all that, and how some of that's changed, I think the biggest challenge that we're seeing across children, teachers, educators, and even the parents have expressed it too, is just finding that balance. Because there's no end, and one would think, oh great, we're remote, you know, you can roll out of bed, jump on the computer, or some kids we notice don't roll out of bed, they stay in bed, and so that kind of messes up their routine and just, I don't want to say life in general, but just that sense of normalcy, so to say, of getting up and getting ready. And so they get stuck in kind of this cycle, but there also tends to be no end to it. And so in the remote world that we're living in, as much as we would think it would be easier, when your computer or your classroom or your job is sitting at the kitchen table or in the dining room, it's constantly there. And so where you would think it would be easier, it's gotten a lot harder because we're having a hard time finding that balance or that end to our day, so to say. And I don't know if anyone else has experienced that as well. But that work-life balance has definitely become, I think, a bigger challenge for a lot.
Yes, Christine, that, I mean, absolutely. There's no end time for our work at all. Before it used to be 6, now it's all the way till 8, 9 o'clock. So I agree.
Well, and we see kids who, and I know high school, I mean, I have little ones at the elementary level, but we see, I mean, it's not necessarily uncommon for the older kids to be submitting homework assignments and things like that late into the evening, but we see our elementary babies submitting assignments on Seesaw and in Teams at like 9 o'clock at night. And it's like, no. We've got to find that nice balance to it. But there's that flexibility and choice. And some of it is because our poor parents have been doing an amazing job trying to support that elementary level while they're managing work. But that could be the only opportunity they have to sit down and support them because they're not necessarily in the classroom where they would have gotten that support. So we see all sides of it, but it's we definitely don't want our little ones and even our big ones in high school exhausting themselves all hours of the night.
One other thing I've noticed, this is I don't know if the other parents have noticed this, especially the younger kids. They're constantly hungry, asking for a snack like every hour. So I need to make sure that there's a variety of snacks ready to go because, I hear from scream, I'm hungry every hour. So that's another thing I'm trying to deal with.
Because you got to get them up and moving.
I would also like to add, from the student perspective, I know there's a lot of family situations as myself where we have to look over for our younger kids because at least my mom, she goes to work at 7:30 and my little sister, her class starts at 7:50. So I have to take the responsibility of waking her up and setting up her computer, even with the beginning, because my mom is not very tech savvy. So she's does not really understand the computer. So I have to babysit my sister while still managing my classes. And like you said, yeah, my sister, every hour she's asking for a snack or something. But yeah, it's been hard also for those students who have been having to babysit their younger siblings, especially my sister who's in kindergarten, and it's hard to make her pay attention and all that.
Right.
Definitely.
I'm gonna jump in there, Jennifer, because I'm so glad you brought that up, and this will be real short. But I think one of the things that I've had to constantly kind of reevaluate myself on is whether I am making a decision based upon an assumption I've made about why a student hasn't done their homework or why they weren't in class, or and I have to check that, and I have to, instead of reaching out saying, hey, you didn't do your homework, you got a 0 or whatever, I have to start it with, I noticed you didn't participate, what's going on, how can I help you? Because 9 times out of 10, the reason behind that is something that's completely out of the student's control. It's they're babysitting their younger children. They're having to take on more responsibilities. Somebody's sick, somebody, the family's passed away. I mean, I've had, the range of this semester. So, just checking that habit of assuming I know what's going on. And instead of doing that, really communicating and finding out what is the situation, that makes a big difference. And that's a hard kind of habit to break that we get into because everybody's dealing with stuff, everybody. And we just have to be mindful of that and be graceful with it.
Definitely. Now, I'd like to open this next question towards the principals in this chat. So what administrative challenges have you faced as a result of the pandemic?
I don't know if there's any other principals on the call, but for us, I think the biggest leadership challenge we have faced is balancing safety and the pursuit of education at the same time, because first and foremost, in running a school, safety is always our top priority. And what we are used to doing across all levels, even from elementary to high school, with sporting events and things of that nature, what we normally do can't be done the same way we've always done it. And so like at the elementary level, our first instinct is to give a child a hug or to bend down and hold their hand or walk. And it's like trying to restrict ourselves from doing some of those practices that we've always done has been a huge challenge, because again, safety has to come first. But at the same time, as you guys some of the challenges you're facing at home, or keeping a kindergartner engaged on the computer, or the snacks because they're sitting, it's hard to sit behind a computer. I know as adults, we're struggling with it too. We want nothing more than that face-to-face interaction or to be walking around and engaging. And so we know that safety has to be our top priority. We also have major concerns about some of the learning loss that is potentially taking place. Earlier, we have mentioned the, you have a wide variety of students, from those that are engaged and motivated and just driven on their own, but then you have those that aren't as motivated intrinsically maybe on their own. And so being at home, it's real easy not to turn your cameras on, not to participate, not to get out of bed and things of those nature. And that's we're seeing causing a lot of learning loss and gaps in learning. And even for the students who are engaged and participating and doing everything they can, I think it's been mentioned a couple times here, it's just not the same. You don't have the collaboration, you don't have the same opportunities to engage in. And so as a district, I know we are really very carefully and watching it and trying to make sure that we are meeting the needs as best we can in this remote environment. But the best thing is to be able to get everyone back at school face to face as quickly as possible, so we can start addressing some of the gaps that we are starting to see, not only from our at-risk kiddos, but also those that are excelling. Those that are our typical accelerated learners aren't necessarily accelerating as fast or as much as they have been in a normal face-to-face environment.
Right, thank you so much for your input. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining me in this little collaborative environment over here. It was really interesting seeing everyone coming together and just discussing about the different questions. So I would like to direct it to Ashu, who's going to finish us off.
Okay, well, I guess we had a pretty lively, fantastic discussion. You know, there are many interesting points that were brought up, challenges that were addressed, and just experiences that were shared amongst the panelists. Overall, I think we all got kind of an understanding of where each other was coming from. So I'd like to take this to this moment to kind of thank everyone who made this event possible. The Johns Creek student ambassadors, you, the audience, the panelists who took time out of their day to join us today, and of course, Ms. Sanders, who provided us the invaluable help and support that we needed along the way. So with that, just please stay safe and good night.
Just before we close, I would just like to take a group picture, and it's interesting because our group pictures now are just screenshots. But yeah, so if all the panelists that have spoken and our ambassadors can turn on their video, and also anyone else that would also like to be in it can also turn on their video, then we can go ahead and take that. But okay, I'll take a couple. So 3, 2, 1. And just 1 or 2 more for safeties. 3, 2, 1. And last one. 3, 2, 1. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great night.
Thank you guys for the invitation and for all that you're doing. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
for coming.
Thank you, everyone. This was great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.